When you hear the words Korean gaming, you probably picture League of Legends, StarCraft, or even Valorant, just to name a few. But how did Korea get so popular with gaming? Well, technically speaking, South Korea was super prepared for the information age. Early on, their government had begun building infrastructure to support relatively cheap, high speed internet connections. By the late 90s, a good amount of South Koreans even had the internet wired up to their homes. Over time, a lot of cafes opened up near universities. These cafes became known as PC bangs. PC bang roughly translates to PC room in Korean, and it's essentially an internet cafe or LAN gaming center in South Korea where customers can use computers, often to play video games in person with friends, for an hourly fee. But it wasn't always like this. In fact, in the 1980s, the South Korean authoritarian government has been cracking down on arcade businesses, closing hundreds down in less than a year. The fifth president at the time, Chun Doo-hwan, was a military dictator that wanted underground arcades filled with slot machines, pinball tables, and video games completely banned. So yeah, this dude was hella anti-fun. Anyways, the situation got a little bit better. By 1983, a law was passed that modified gambling establishments and video game arcades. This means that the two would no longer be lumped under one. At that time, the country Taiwan was staying ahead in the electronics industry. South Korea didn't want to fall behind. This man, Shin Kuk-won, wanted companies to invest in semiconductors and basic computer manufacturing. Korean companies were able to produce a bunch of computers in the early 1980s, like the SPC 800 from Samsung and the FC80 from Goldstar, the company that later changed to LG, and the IQ 1000 from Daewoo. For this video, I wanted to go into more detail with the firm Daewoo. Daewoo is simply a South Korean automotive company that was established in 1937 as National Motors. The company was known for producing a lot of cheap, affordable cars. But Daewoo and other firms like Samsung, Hyundai, and Goldstar are known as Chaebol, which is a large family-owned business conglomerate producing many diverse services. A good example would be Samsung, which produces TVs, phones, dishwashers, and so on. If you want to know more about the dark side of Chaebols, I highly recommend watching this video. Anyways, Daewoo was pretty much the same thing. This firm got involved in textiles, telecommunication, musical instruments, shipbuilding, and manufacturing. But the one I want to focus on is Daewoo Electronics and how it was a major player in the computer age in Korea. Daewoo first ventured in the world of home computing with the MSX standard. If you don't know what an MSX computer is, that's okay. These machines were popular in the East and not so much in the West. It wasn't until 1984 that Korea decided to produce MSX computers, starting with the IQ 1000 series. Why did Korea use these machines? Well, the computer was mainly used for offices and educational help, especially with English homework. You see, education is very important in Korea. Around over 80% of 5-year-olds are enrolled in some form of private education, which makes sense since the students have to go through a tough testing and exam arrangement in order to get into top universities. So the MSX machine makes sense. But Daewoo decided to make a left turn and release the Zimex console in 1985, a machine that focused on just playing video games and not so much on education. Daewoo wanted to release the console because there was huge potential in making a lot of money from this machine in an untapped market. But there was another reason. Daewoo bought a bunch of RAM chips for the MSX computer. But technology is moving at a rapid pace. The chips quickly became obsolete for the MSX computer, so Daewoo decided to put together a cheap console just to get rid of all the obsolete RAM, and it actually worked out. In 1985, the console sold around 70,000 won, which is roughly around 245,000 won, which is equivalent to around $200 today. This car company was somehow able to reach a broad audience in Korea, but how are the games? It's a bit complicated. The Zemex had a giant library of games that could be played at will. Back then, computer programs weren't subject to copyright in Korea, so what happened was a lot of companies took advantage of this by taking popular MSX titles and passing them off as their own game. Korean firms like Topia, Zemina, and ProSoft would take American or Japanese games, add a screen with their own company's name, and don't have to pay anything to the game's original creator. It got so bad that Korea had to pass a law that brought computers under copyright control, but there was a flaw. The law only protected the code itself, but not the intellectual property around the game, so there was still a lot of clone games everywhere. For example, there was a remake of Super Mario Bros. Called Superboy, which is a half-assed version of the original game since there wasn't enough memory on the MSX. This game is about a little over 10 minutes long and probably the first Mario Bros. Game where you don't meet up with Princess Peach. Throughout the late 80s and early 90s, piracy was getting out of control in Korea. This was a pain for Korean game developers wanting to create their own original games. The gamers would usually turn to bootleg games because they cost at a much lower price. What finally started to break away from the piracy was Korean MUDs. Korean MUDs, which stood for multi-user dungeon games. These were successful in the mid-90s, but why were they so popular? Well, it turns out with online games, you can't really pirate them because they're on a server. This meant that Korean gaming was rapidly getting more popular. While this was happening, Daewoo was still pumping out new versions of the ZimX, like the CPC-50A and the CPC-50B. Another design that got a lot of attention was the CPC-51, or ZimX5. Even though there's not too much information on the console sales or games, you could probably find one on eBay that's around $2,400. That's like almost 5 Nintendo Switch 2s for one ZimX. Eventually, other modules of the ZimX got released, like the ZimX Super V and the ZimX Turbo. Around the late 80s, the ZimX console started to decline. The main reason was probably an increase of competition. Famicom clones are making their way from Taiwan to Korea, like the Super Wonder Boy. Another reason for the decline was propaganda. You see, Korea got hit with a bunch of newspaper articles and TV news segments going over kids having passed out due to epilepsy. This created fear and a small decline with console sales due to parents fearing their kids might get epilepsy due to playing video games. PC gaming was also becoming popular in Korea, which had customers buying less consoles, and the final nail in the coffin was the 1997 Asian financial crisis, and the firm declared bankrupt in 1999. Even though Korea never embraced console gaming as big as the United States or Japan, in my opinion, the car company Daewoo did help popularize the console gaming in Korea, even if it only lasted less than 10 years. See you guys next time, and thanks for watching.